Whispers from the Old Mill. Chapter 1. The Forgotten Echoes. The drive to the outskirts of Windale was filled with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Claire Bennett's curiosity had led her to many haunted and forsaken places, but the old mill had always lingered in the back of her mind. It was an imposing structure, etched against the backdrop of a gray, overcast sky, its silhouette a stark reminder of an era long past. The locals avoided it, claiming it was cursed by the tragedies it had witnessed over the decades. As Claire parked her car near the dilapidated fence that surrounded the mill, she took a moment to gather her thoughts. The wind was particularly strong that day, carrying with it the faint smell of decay that seemed to emanate from the mill itself. She checked her recording equipment, making sure everything was in order before she stepped out into the chilly air. The gate creaked ominously as she pushed it open, its rusted hinges groaning under the strain. Her boots crunched on the gravel path leading up to the mill, each step echoing in the unnerving silence that enveloped the place. Claire could feel the weight of unseen eyes watching her, though she knew the feeling was likely just her nerves. She began her podcast as she walked, her voice recorder securely held in her hand. Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Whispers from the Shadows, where we delve into the mysteries and legacies of the forgotten corners of our world. Today, I bring you with me to the old mill of Windale, a place shrouded in mystery and, some say, haunted by the past. Reaching the entrance, Claire paused to take in the sight of the mill's interior. The large wooden doors were slightly ajar, allowing the wind to moan through the gaps like the breath of the building itself. She pushed the doors open, and they swung inward with a loud screech that echoed off the walls. Inside, the mill was a cavernous space, with broken beams and scattered debris. The old milling machinery, rusted and covered in cobwebs, told stories of a time when the mill was bustling with activity. Now it stood silent, except for the whispers of the wind through broken windows and cracks in the walls. Claire walked deeper into the mill, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, casting large, ominous shadows on the walls. Local legends say that the mill is haunted by the miller who used to operate it, she narrated, her voice steady despite the eerie atmosphere. They say he comes back to ensure the mill isn't forgotten, to remind us of the tragedy that struck him and his family. As she made her way to the center of the mill, Claire spotted an old dust-covered book lying atop a pile of debris. Curious, she picked it up, wiping away the dust to reveal a faded leather cover. It was a journal by the looks of it. She carefully opened it, the pages creaking as they turned. The handwriting inside was old and faded, but still legible. December 5th, 1896, Claire read aloud, her voice echoing slightly in the vast space. The winter has been harsh, and the mill runs slow. My Marie worries for our son, Thomas, who has taken ill. The doctor visits, but there is little he can do. I pray for an early spring. Claire felt a chill run down her spine, not from the cold, but from the connection she suddenly felt with the miller, a man who had stood perhaps exactly where she was standing, over a century ago. She continued to read, each entry providing a glimpse into the life of the miller, his struggles with the failing business, and his family's fight against sickness. As she reached an entry dated a few months later, Claire's hands trembled slightly. March 13th, 1897. Marie took Thomas to the city to see a new doctor. I am left to tend the mill alone. The loneliness is unbearable. A sudden gust of wind whipped through the mill, sending pages of the journal fluttering. Claire's flashlight flickered, and for a moment she thought she heard a whisper, an almost inaudible sigh. She froze, listening intently. The sound came again, a faint, mournful wail that seemed to resonate through the old wooden beams of the mill. Gathering her courage, Claire spoke into her recorder. Is there someone here with me? Can you speak again? The silence that followed was oppressive, and Claire wondered if she had imagined the sounds. She turned back to the journal, intent on reading more, when the air grew inexplicably colder. Her breath formed a mist in the beam of her flashlight, and she knew without a doubt that she was not alone. Chapter 2. The Whispering Shadows. Claire's heart pounded as she scanned the shadowy interior of the old mill, her breath visible in the cold air that had inexplicably descended upon the room. She had heard the stories, tales whispered by the townsfolk of eerie occurrences and ghostly sightings within these walls. But nothing had prepared her for the tangible presence she now felt. The chills seemed to seep into her bones, a cold reminder that some legends held a kernel of truth. Regaining her composure, Claire focused on her mission. She resumed reading the Miller's journal, her voice slightly quivering as she spoke into the recorder. March 20th, 1897. The mill groans under the weight of winter's remnants. At night, I hear it whisper. I cannot tell if it is the wind or something else. Claire paused, her eyes scanning the dim corners of the mill. What whispers did you hear, Miller? She murmured, half expecting an answer. A soft creak sounded from above, like a sigh from the aged wooden beams. The ambiance was perfect for her podcast, but Claire couldn't shake the feeling that she was intruding on sacred ground, disturbing a peace that was begrudgingly settled. With a deep breath, she continued to explore, her flashlight illuminating the path ahead. The mill seemed endless, each corner and crevice holding decades of neglect. As she ventured toward the back of the mill, the air grew denser and the temperature dropped further. She found herself in what appeared to be an old office, the furniture covered in dust sheets. Suddenly, her flashlight flickered again, and in the brief moment of darkness, Claire saw it, a shadowy figure standing in the doorway. Her heart leapt to her throat, and she stumbled backward, her hand instinctively reaching for the wall to steady herself. The light steadied, and the figure was gone, as if it had been a trick of the light. Hello? Claire's voice was barely a whisper. Silence greeted her, heavy and expectant. She forced herself to walk to the doorway where she had seen the figure. Nothing was there but the lingering cold. Shaking off the fear, she decided it was best to document her experiences. I thought I saw something, a figure in the shadows. It could be my mind playing tricks, or maybe, just maybe, the Miller's still here. Determined to make the most out of her visit, Claire set up her recording equipment with a directional microphone pointed toward the center of the room. She sat down cross-legged and began an EVP, electronic voice phenomenon session, a standard practice in paranormal investigations where questions are asked aloud in hopes of capturing responses on audio recordings that were not heard at the time. Miller of the Old Mill, are you here with us? Claire spoke clearly, her voice echoing slightly in the empty space. Can you tell us your name? She waited, the recorder running, the only sound the soft whir of the device. After a minute of silence, she asked another question. What happened here? Why do you linger? Claire continued this for several minutes, asking questions and leaving pauses, hoping for responses. After concluding the session, she played back the recording, listening intently with headphones. The playback was mostly just the sound of her own voice and the ambient noise of the old building. But then she heard it, a faint murmur after her question about why the spirit lingered. She replayed the segment, turning up the volume, her breath held in anticipation. The voice was male, rough and whispering, "My son, lost." A chill ran down Claire's spine. The Miller was indeed here, and he had spoken. She needed more, to understand his story, his tragedy. Renewed by the encounter, Claire continued her exploration, now directed by an unseen guide. As she moved through the mill, she found remnants of the past, a child's broken toy, a woman's scarf, each artifact whispering stories of a life once lived. Claire collected these items, documenting each find with her camera, narrating her thoughts and theories about the family that once called this place home. The sun began to set outside, casting long shadows across the mill floor. Claire knew she should leave soon, but felt compelled to stay a bit longer. She returned to the office, sitting among the artifacts she had gathered. She opened the journal again, continuing to read from where she had left off, each entry weaving a more detailed tapestry of the Miller's life and loss. Her flashlight cast a pool of light on the journal, the outside world growing darker, the wind's howl a constant companion. As she read the final entries, she understood the depth of the Miller's despair, his entries becoming more disjointed, a reflection of his unraveling mind. Then the true nature of the tragedy unfolded in the Miller's shaky script. April 2nd, 1897. They returned today. Marie, Thomas, both silent, both cold. The doctor could not save them. I am alone. Tears blurred Claire's vision as she read the last words, the journal ending abruptly, the final pages blank. The miller had lost everything, his family, his livelihood, and now he lingered, a whisper among the shadows, bound to the place of his deepest despair. Claire packed up her equipment, her mind heavy with the story she had uncovered. As she left the old mill, the wind seemed to carry a soft thank you, a whisper from the past, acknowledging her listening ear, her respectful presence. Driving away, Claire felt a mixture of sadness and satisfaction. She had come seeking a ghost and had found a man, his story preserved in the whispers of the old mill. Her podcast would tell his tale, not just of hauntings, but of love, loss, and the indelible marks they leave behind. Chapter 3. Echoes Resolved. As Claire drove away from the old mill, the evening sky turned a deep shade of twilight. The day's events played back in her mind like an old film, the echoes of the miller's voice still whispering in her ears. She knew she had uncovered something profound, a tangible link to the past that was both haunting and heart-wrenching. Upon returning home, Claire immediately set to work. Her recording studio, usually a place of technological interaction, felt tonight like a sanctuary where the miller's story could finally be told. She uploaded the audio files from her recorder, the photographs of the artifacts, and her notes from the journal. Each piece of evidence was a thread in the intricate tapestry of the miller's life and legacy. As she began editing the podcast, Claire incorporated the sounds from the mill, the creaking wood, the whistling wind, and the faint EVPs. She layered these with a soft, melancholic music score that seemed to encapsulate the mood of the mill. Her narration wove through the audio, guiding her listeners on a journey through the dark and dusty chambers of the mill and into the heart of its former keeper. Today's episode takes us to a place out of time, Claire's voice echoed in her headphones. The old mill in Windale holds more than just dust and shadows. It holds a story of loss, loneliness, and the lingering presence of a man who could not leave behind the memories of his family. She detailed the findings from the journal, sharing the miller's struggles and sorrows with her audience. The EVP recording was particularly compelling, and she played the clip several times, allowing her listeners to hear the whispered words themselves. My son, lost. The response to the podcast was overwhelming. Messages poured in from listeners who were moved by the miller's story, some sharing their own experiences with loss and hauntings. The episode quickly became one of the most popular in the series, with many requesting a follow-up investigation or more stories like it. Motivated by the success and the connection she had felt with the miller, Claire decided to visit the Windale Historical Society. Perhaps there was more to uncover about the mill and its unfortunate owner. The society was a small one-room building near the center of town, run by a few dedicated historians. Ah, the old mill, Mr. Hammond, the society's elderly curator, said as Claire explained her interest. There's been a lot of tragedy there, more than most know. He shuffled to a cabinet, pulling out a stack of old newspapers and photographs. Here, he handed her a faded photograph. This was the miller, George Millward, and his family. Claire examined the photo. It showed a stern-looking man with a thick beard, standing beside a woman and a young boy. The resemblance to the figures in her EVP session was uncanny. There's a story here, not just of ghosts, but of a family and a community, Mr. Hammond continued, his voice softening. George was well-liked, a pillar of the community until the tragedy. His wife Marie and their son Thomas both died of tuberculosis in the winter of '97. It devastated him, sent him into a solitude that he never came out of. Armed with new information and a photograph that put faces to the names, Claire felt a renewed commitment to her storytelling. She decided to produce a follow-up episode, focusing not just on the paranormal but on the historical context of the haunting. The story of George Millward was not just one of spectral remnants, but of human resilience and the profound impact of grief. In her follow-up, Claire explored the broader implications of the Millward family story, discussing the history of tuberculosis and its ravages on families in the 19th century. She interviewed historians and medical experts, weaving a rich narrative that complemented the ghostly tales from her initial visit. As the series progressed, Claire's approach to the paranormal became more nuanced. She realized that each haunted place had a story to tell, not just of ghosts, but of past lives and forgotten histories. Her listeners came for the chills, but stayed for the stories, the human connections that transcended time and death. The whispers we hear in the dark, Claire concluded in her series, are not just calls from beyond. They are echoes of the past, asking us not to forget those who came before us. The old mill remained standing, its structure more a monument than a menace. Claire's work had cast new light into its shadowed corners, revealing the humanity hidden within its haunted halls. And as the sun set over Windale, the whispers of the old mill seemed a little less mournful, a testament to a story heard and a life remembered.